Well, thank you, and thank you, Julian, not sure which you prefer to be called. You've almost given me an amazing preface there to what I'm going to talk about by telling me your story. It's really quite an interesting possibility for us to learn from the stories that we hear that are out there in the media, that are available. So I'm going to start with a little bit about the story of the research we've been doing. We've been looking at people's stories of stroke initially, and more recently brain injury. And stroke, of course, is part of brain injury. And the project's called Yarns. We did name it that because have you ever heard of somebody telling you a yarn? It's another way of saying a story. But it actually stands for Young Adults, Rehabilitation Experiences and Needs Following Brain Injury or Stroke. And we're on the second project of that now, but I'll save that bit till later in the story this afternoon. So I want to start off by thinking about brain injury, stroke, and actually I'm going to give you a little test to see how much you were listening earlier. We're talking about young people here, or I'm talking about young people, and our definition of young people, and there are many definitions of young people, and I regret to say this, is 18 to 45. That's the window we've taken. You might have guessed that I'm actually outside that age range now, but that's life. First thing this morning, Alistair was talking about the brain. He was talking about different ways in which it can be damaged. Following that, we had a psychologist. I've lost her name now. Who was talking about different ways in which brain injury can occur. So, clots or bleeds, which is going to be the most common in young people, do you think, for stroke? Hands up for clots. Hands up for bleeds. You were listening, well done. Yeah, in younger people, we tend to have more people with strokes from bleeds in the brains, so the hemorrhagic strokes, as opposed to the clots or the ischemic strokes. Now, this one's probably a little bit more difficult. We've heard Julian talking about brain injury that followed an assault, in effect. There are many ways in which we can injure our brains. It can be assault, it can be hypoxia, Alistair talked about that, which could be from drowning, it could be from carbon monoxide, it could be from a situation like that. We could fall from a height, but what was the most common brain injury that you came across? Was it any one of those? Fall from standing. Falls of less than 2 meters. And where do most of those take place, do you think? In the home, yeah. So, this is not to say you need to stand high above 2 meters whenever you're at home. That would not be a good idea. But actually, the most common form of brain injury is small falls. And I recall a story of a student years back who was just having a drink with friends, sat on a wall outside the pub, and leant back a bit too far, fell over backwards, fell on the back of her head. And that paused her university career for several years. She did eventually get back, but she sustained quite a major brain injury just from that low fall. There again, we have other falls. There's a great film, actually, by somebody who was snowboarding. And she got it wrong. Did this wonderful loop, didn't quite get there, and actually landed on the back of her head. Fortunately, she was wearing a helmet, sustained a major brain injury. Me and My Broken Brain. Look it up sometime. It's a great film. I'll say a bit more about that one later. So, we've got the main causes there. When we're talking about stories, we can each look back at our own story. Our own story is evolving on a daily basis. Julian actually sort of referred to this. Every day we're having new experiences. We're hearing new things. We're perhaps reading new things or seeing new things. And that's changing the way our brain's connected a little bit. And so by the time you leave this meeting today, your brains will be slightly different to when you came in this morning. You'll have learnt things, you'll have absorbed things, you'll have experienced things. So we each have our own stories. We can look back over our stories, but we can choose how we share our stories. And the way we share our stories will depend who we're talking to, our audience. It'll depend on why we're telling it, the purpose behind our story. And it'll also depend on how we're telling it. So why do people tell their stories? I didn't put my slides up, did I? Huh. Never mind. Basic mistake. That's the title. Learning from the stories of brain injury in young adults. We've heard that one already. But why do people tell their stories? And this author, Reisman, who's written a book on narrative inquiry, I'm sorry. You can take the academic out of the university, but you can never get the university out of the academic. Anyhow, she came up with these 6 purposes behind telling a story. And probably one of the key ones for us in the health context is making sense of events, making sense of the past events. We can, by telling our story, sort out how that story flows. But we can also use it to present an argument, to illustrate and interpret events. And if we're presenting an argument, we can use that to persuade our audience. And we might change the way that they behave through that. I hope we can engage our audience with stories. And a lot of stand-up comedians use stories. I'm not a stand-up comedian, by the way. Well, maybe not. Engaging our audience in those stories to both attract them, to keep their attention, but also perhaps to educate them as well. And if you're around, I think there's a big event going on in August. Is it called the Fringe? Yeah. Well, if you find the right place at the stand on the 15th of August, you can come and hear us talk a bit more about head injury there, because 3 of us from the team today will be doing an event at the stand there. The final purpose, one of the final purposes, I've talked about entertaining there, but the final purpose is around misdirecting. I have a feeling there's a few around the world, elections taking place this year. And we're hearing plenty of promises, stories, what have you. And some of those will be to misdirect us. And if somebody tells you something sufficiently often, sufficiently vehemently, regardless of whether it's true or not, you can actually be misdirected through those stories. So beware of that, particularly this year of elections. Stories are complex, many parts. There's order to them. Sometimes we tell them in a chronological order. Sometimes we jump to and fro in our stories. But the events in the story are structured by the players, the timing, and the purpose. So, moving on to the health agenda, one of the main purposes here, and I know that I'm talking both to people working in health, but also people who are consumers of health. And in fact, most of us are probably, well, all of us will be consumers in the health service in some way or another, sooner or later. And If you're a health professional, when you meet somebody, you will be using an approach to draw out from them that structured story that tells you what you need to know about what's going on. As a consumer of health services, you'll very quickly get used to the way that you need to tell the health professional what you're doing to get to where you want to be. And what we found in our research was that people were using their stories to order their thoughts, make sense of that narrative. And we saw that through social media, we saw that through blogs, we saw that through books, films. But particularly the social media was fascinating because it was as if you get snapshots of the individual over time. And they were also using that to be able to look back to see where they'd come from. And Julian again talked very much about this flow, this change over time that he saw. We have a number of stalls out there, and I know that Stroke Association, Headway, an organisation called Different Strokes, publish a lot of stories, because I've looked at many of them, about people who've had stroke, who've had brain injury, and they use those stories to encourage people on their journey and support them. And also some campaigning going on there. Now, in our research, we looked at loads of stories, hundreds actually, and we managed to group the steps in the stories, a bit like this step going up. And these are the first 3 steps, and there's another 2 slides, each with 3 steps on it, so it makes 9 steps in total, of the various stages that we saw. And we've heard some of those from Julian today. We've heard our other colleagues talking about some of those stages. And those early stages are around about the past self. And it's around some of the quotes that we have there, when I can find them. Oh, I know, I'm in the wrong bit. No, never mind. It's around the past self, where we hear of 2 lives. Somebody who's actually experienced the event of a stroke, the event of a brain injury, and they look back and they say, I wish I was like that. And they want to try and get back to where they were, not recognizing that actually life has changed for them. So 2 lives, then and now. Many years back, when I was working with some spinal injured patients, one of them was being interviewed, and the interviewer actually asked, what was it like having your injury? What was it like before? What was it like after? And he said, well, that previous self died. That wasn't me now. That's not me now. I'm this person. And he put it that starkly. At the event, particularly with stroke and young people, do young people have strokes? Well, yes, they do. And probably about 6% of strokes, and even more now, post-COVID, are in the younger age group. But there's so much misdiagnosis there, the belief amongst young people and the belief amongst some health professionals often about young people, well, they don't present with a stroke. What have you been taking? Have you been drinking? What have you been... And these are common stories. About 30% of the stories that we saw had an event around, a part of them which was around misdiagnosis at the start of their journey there. And then an emotional journey. It's, it really is quite a messing up of your emotions, particularly in the early phases. You'll have people that will have considerable lability in their emotions. and inappropriate emotions. And again, Julian spoke a little bit about this in terms of his expression and delivery of speech as he relearnt that. So one of them said, at the beginning I struggled, lost strength in my arm and leg, lots of tears, but plenty of laughs and accomplishments, good days and bad days. And then this was an interesting bit. I went to the gym and discovered powerlifting. And she's a champion powerlifter, believe it or not. So, emotional elements there in our journey. Moving on, we found that certainly in the inpatient and rehab setting, people who would direct them on their way in the journey, the stroke nurse particularly in the stroke units or the rehabilitation staff, would be information givers. They were described as the map readers, the person who would direct them on the path that they needed to go. And then who am I now? That step, going home. I couldn't wait to get home. But as soon as I did, I had an overwhelming sense of fear and panic. Home was not the home that they'd left before the event. It was quite different then. These changes, these step changes, moving out, this is where we really do need support. We really need the support, and many of the organisations out there are actually focused very strongly on that support. And it's great to see here, it's great to share with those today. It is an enormous challenge. But then, as they overcome those challenges and move on, you get an evolution. You get this journey progressing on. But it's not always smooth progress. One individual who was rather exasperated said, please excuse the language here, I need help, and it's shit trying to prove that you're disabled when you're working hard to recover. And that was after she'd had the experience of trying to get into the benefit system for support, disabled living allowance, as I think it was called then, and she was being turned down because she could actually walk as far as the bus stop. So, moving on again, this rehab community. I really shouldn't have had so many pieces of paper here. Never mind. Again, one of the stories was about somebody who'd been to the dentist, believe it or not, and the dentist had pointed them to a GP who was very strong and good at developing, at directing people through rehab and through their journey there. And once they got into the rehab setting, they just skyrocketed in their abilities and so on. They really moved forward. So, but there are invisible obstacles. These obstacles that are around fatigue, emotion, those cognitive challenges that our psychologists were talking about earlier, memory, all of these things can get in the way. They can be invisible. People don't see them. They don't understand them. And yet they can change an individual. Again, early on in my research career, I remember meeting up with a friend, actually, whose husband had had a stroke. And she was taking some time out to think what to do next. And her phrase was, he's not the person I married. He's changed, and I'm worried for my children. Because she had young children at the time. And those are challenges that for the caregivers as well, the carers amongst you, that it's not just one person, it's a group of people that are involved. Their family often, other carers, maybe parents, maybe children. There's a lot going on there. But also, on the journey, we have companions. And actually, that's one of the places where sharing the experiences can be so powerful. And do look at some of the stories you'll find on the websites, Different Strokes, the Stroke Association, the Headway, lots of stories there. Success stories, yes. Long stories, yes. This is not a quick journey. And one thing that I would say about the way I have structured this, it looks like it's a nice regular staircase, and you just keep stepping up and up and up. It's more like snakes and ladders. You may actually leap up a few, slide back a few. It's not necessarily going to be a smooth journey on the way. So I appreciate that we're running out. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about our story now. I started off by talking about the young adults' rehabilitation experiences and needs following stroke. This was a research project that we started at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. Unfortunately, we were looking for publicly available stories, because in March that year, we all got sent off to the different places, locked down, and in the university, any hands-on research virtually stopped. But fortunately, we were able to carry on with this, and this is where we collected these stories. From that, we understood that actually there was a major gap in the psychosocial rehabilitation and a potential role there for the nurses and other health professionals to help direct people in that approach around psychosocial rehabilitation. So what we're now doing in the project that we're currently undertaking, which is around the same topic area but developing practice, we're looking at what works, for whom, and how does it work. What is good and best practice? We're actually looking to interview healthcare professionals about what they're doing, what they see as their best practice, what they see as the gaps. What are the young people's experiences? And we're looking to recruit, and we call them experts by experience, people who know what, they've lived this, they know what this is. These experts by experience here. We're looking to recruit them and discover from them what's worked for them, where the problems were. And then taking that forward to what can we learn from all this and how can we use that to develop practice. And so thank you. Thank you for listening. Please come and talk to us. We have a stall there. You can be involved in this story as it develops further. Contact us through that web address. Check out our website. You don't have to take a picture of this now. There are flyers with the QR code out there. And thanks to our funders, who are the Royal College of Nursing Foundation, with the support of a charity, Same You. And Same You have a lot of stories on their website as well. So thanks from the Yarns team and the partners to the Yarns team. Thank you.